Welcome, welcome everyone. So wonderful to practice together with you, folks who are here in the room, folks who are online. This evening, this is the Tuesday Tune In. So this evening, we're going to be doing our regular program, which means we have about 25 or 30 minutes of meditation. And I'll give some guidance of the meditation during the meditation, and then we'll transition to the Dhamma talk, and then we'll have about 30 minutes or so of Dhamma talk, Dhamma reflection, and at the end of that period of time, then I will turn off the recording and we'll have an opportunity. You'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, any kinds of reflections on the meditation or on the talk. And again, a big thank you to Claudia, who's doing our Spanish simultaneous interpretation this evening. And don't hesitate to text me, Claudia, if there's anything that you need. And for now, we are going to go ahead and begin with the meditation this evening. So this evening, what I would like to do is a meditation on the elements of the body. And typically there are 4, but I think for the sake of having a peaceful meditation and not too busy meditation, we'll just try to practice with 1 or 2 of them in this short period of time that we have. So feel free to have your cameras on or off, whatever feels more comfortable for you. The way that we are recording means that you won't be showing up on the recording either way. So there's no need to be concerned about that part of it. It's only recording this part of the stream. And so you can begin to establish your meditation posture. I often like to begin with a little bit of rocking the body and the head. Just loosening up any tension or any tendency to lean toward the screen. And relaxing the belly. Feeling that natural stability of the body. And from that stable base, allowing the bones of the spine to line up and bring you into an upright posture. And knowing that the bones are carrying the weight of the body. Perhaps you can relax and soften the muscles around the ribs and the chest. Just allowing the breath to breathe the body, the natural rhythms of the breath. So beginning at the crown of the head and becoming aware of the presence of the earth element. We know that there is earth in every cell of the body. So beginning at the crown of the head and beginning to move the attention downward, just aware of the presence of the earth element throughout the body. Down through the head and slowly down through the neck. No need to strain to feel it, just enough to know that there's earth element in that part of the body. Moving down the right shoulder and down the right arm. Slowly, slowly. Coming to the right hand, pervaded by the earth element. And the left hand, and beginning to move up the left arm. arriving at the left shoulder. And beginning to move slowly down the torso, aware of earth as this body. And because this body is pervaded by earth, it also has the qualities of earth, qualities of stability and firmness. Coming to the hips. And beginning to move down the right leg, aware of the earth element throughout the body. Eventually arriving at the right foot. And then shifting the attention to the top of the left leg. And slowly making your way down. Knowing this body as earth element. And eventually arriving at the left foot. Also completely pervaded by earth. Steady, firm. And now opening the attention to the whole body at once. The whole body from head to toe. Knowing earth as this body. Just sensing the steadiness of the earth element. And in these last few moments of the meditation, and turning the attention to the earth element outside the body, earth element beneath you and your seat, the floor beneath that, somewhere below there, the planet. Just becoming aware of earth beneath you. Even the air around you contains the earth element, some degree of dust or pollen. Earth element all around you. And all those kinds of earth are basically the same. Earth element internally and earth element externally. Beautiful. That was our meditation for this evening's program. And now I'm going to go ahead and transition directly into the Dhamma talk. And again, you can feel free to adjust your camera, your posture. Please keep your mics muted. And I'll begin as I usually do with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Today, I would like to speak about the body as our vehicle for practice. When I first started practicing Buddhism many, many years ago, I thought, I had received some instructions about how to sit. And it was mostly about the posture and, having your ears be aligned with your shoulders and your hips, that kind of thing. And I thought, oh, that's just the preliminaries, because really meditation is about the mind. And it wasn't until many years later that I began to attend formal practice at a temple in San Francisco. And I started experiencing different types of ritual in Buddhism, Buddhist rituals. And then I realized, oh, and that's actually about the body, about learning to embody the practice. And so more and more I began to see this thread. I began to notice the ways in which the teachings of Buddhism throughout the various traditions are really oftentimes beginning right here with the body. And so over time, what I've come to notice is that part of the request of practice is that we use this body to discover that which is greater than this body, that which goes beyond this particular specific body. So we use this body as a way to study, to observe the greater truths of our lives. And this weekend, I was giving a day of retreat, and one of the suttas that we were looking at, that I was speaking about, is a sutta that tells us quite a bit about this side of things, this aspect. And it's from the Middle Length Discourse, number 28, Majjhima Nikaya 28. And it's the so-called longer simile of the elephant's footprint. And I won't go into the whole thing tonight, but what I do want to do is just touch a little bit on what's presented there. Because in this sutta, the Venerable Sariputta, so Sariputta was basically like one of the key, if not the key, disciple of the historical Buddha, person who lived 2,500 years ago or so. And he is giving a teaching here about the noble truths And he begins by stating what the truths are, and then he gives this definition, this kind of classical definition of dukkha. Dukkha is the Pali word, typically translated as suffering, or I really like unsatisfactoriness for dukkha. And he gives a classical definition of that. So rebirth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, which means something like sorrow, pain, grief, despair, and distress. Those are all dukkha, those are all forms of suffering. And then he says, in brief, and this is again, he's quoting the Buddha. The Buddha actually gave this definition of suffering in the first discourse that he gave after his awakening, or as it's understood in early Buddhism, the sutta on the first turning of the wheel of Dhamma. And he says, in summary, the 5 grasping aggregates are suffering. So what are the 5 aggregates? It's the body and 4 aspects of mind. And it's important, this word grasping. So we need to be careful. One of the things that I really like to point out here is to say that it's not saying, this definition of suffering is not saying that the body and the mind are inevitably going to cause us suffering. That's not what it means. It means that when we are grasping at them, when they grasp at themselves, actually, then that's when suffering occurs. And why might that be? Well, looking at the body, even just looking at the body, let alone the mind, we can actually see why that's the case. And so what Venerable Sariputta does is he does this beautiful technique that they often do in the suttas, where you give a group of things and then you select one of those things and you give more detail about that and define it as another group of things. And then you kind of drill down a little further and a little further. Nowadays, in modern parlance, we would call unpacking that. So he's doing some unpacking of the 5 aggregates. And he begins with form. So form, again, is typically, this word in Pali is rupa, and it's typically translated as form. Although, again, what do we mean by form? We mean the body and things which emanate from the body. So things like tears, or things like waste, heat, those kinds of things that are emanating from the form body. And the form body is understood in early Buddhism to be made of 4 elements, the so-called 4 great elements. So earth, water, fire, air. Those are the 4 great elements. And at first, for us modern folks, we think, oh, that's a very archaic way of thinking about the body, perhaps. But actually, if you just take a kind of practical approach to that, you can see that we are, in fact, beings made of earth, right? We talk about ourselves as carbon-based beings. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was very popular to talk about beings as stardust. We're all made of stardust. That's also literally true. If you've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson recently speak about that, he also likes to touch on that. Very famous astrophysicist here in the States. So there's that piece of it. We are made of earth, of this solid type of matter that we see not only here in this body, but all around us, right? The things we're sitting on, the floor, the planet, the trees, the moon above you. Maybe this evening you might be able to see the moon. All things made of matter. And then we have water. So I always joke around because I read somewhere a long time ago that babies have a lot more water than older people like me. We tend to shrivel up like raisins as we get older. But even older folks like me, we have a fair amount, a large percentage of water in the body, right? Every single cell has some degree of water. And again, if we look at the external world, you look at even the air around you has some degree of water, humidity. This time of year, you might be very aware of the degree of humidity that is in the air at any point in time, right? Or the thing that comes out of your tap, or the rain, or the creek running behind your house. So all these different ways that we experience our external water element. And then you have fire. So fire represents chemical processes like digestion, for example, in the body. So when we say, colloquially, we say we are burning calories, that's what that means. That's fire element, burning calories. Or like the firing of neurons, of our nerves throughout our body. We say that they fire, right? This feeling of your heartbeat, that is the fire element. Those kinds of chemical interactions that are happening from moment to moment. So all of that is present within us, that fire element, and that quality of transformation. That's what that represents, that quality of transforming. And again, we see it outside of us in the form of light, in the form of maybe your gas stove or your electric stove, the candles here lit with fire element. Heat, the heat in the air. So again, even the air has all the four elements, right? Has some degree of heat, of warmth. Otherwise, you couldn't sit here. You would freeze. And then the air element. So air element is known from ancient India as being associated with the movement, because it was something you could see in the body, the air coming in and out of the body. So it's associated with movement, or quote unquote wind. And in current day, we know that every cell in the body has oxygen in it. We cannot survive without oxygen in all of those cells. In fact, we need oxygen, interestingly, to move our bodies, to move our muscles. So even in modern times, the air element is associated with movement of the body. And then you have air element externally, the whole vast sky. So these are the ways that we can begin to relate to the actual body as made up of different so-called elements, the older version of the elements, and the qualities that they represent. As I was saying during the meditation, they represent various qualities like hardness, like smoothing and cohesion, like heat and transformation, like the spaciousness and the movement of air. So we can observe these elements in the inner world, we can observe the elements in the outer world. And the teaching that's given about this, which is a very interesting one, is this. So as Venerable Sariputta, in the early Buddhist teachings, they really like to talk about body parts. So he gives us a long list of the examples of the earth element, for example, as body parts: teeth, your fingernails, your hair. No, I don't have much to show in that regard, but bones, your heart, the actual muscle, yeah. And then he says, the interior earth element and the exterior earth element are just earth element. And when you see that, when you see with right understanding, then you see, oh, this is not mine. This is not a self. This is not something that I can hang my hat on, so to speak. It begins to depersonalize. It begins to blur the boundary between the inner and the outer. And so the beauty of this, so an example of this is many years ago, I was at the Zen Center there in San Francisco, and Paul Haller, who was then the abbot at that time, gave this teaching for the kids. He held up an apple. Now, what is an apple? So I'm going to explain it before I tell you what he said. So what is an apple? An apple is earth element. Right? It also has some water in it. It also has some air. It also has a bit of fire, a little bit of warmth. But it's primarily earth element, the solid fiber of an apple. Right? And so he held up an apple and he said to the kids, so if I take a bite of the apple, at what point does it become me? And it's a very interesting question, right? Is the apple you when you're holding it? Is the apple you when you're chewing it? Is the apple you after you swallow? Once you digest it and the stuff begins to move around the body in smaller parts? And what about the part that you're not going to move about the body? What about the part that becomes the waste? Is that you or is that not you? So this natural transformation that is happening at all times, this natural way in which the body is completely informed by our environment, and the environment is also being informed by our presence. Right? You can't walk into the room without changing the temperature of the room in a very, very small way. For example, so we're also having our impacts on the environment. So this constant state of looking at the interdependence, and ultimately not just interdependence of two separate things, but things that are not separate, things that are deeply connected, things that can only exist because of the presence of other things. That's how we can understand our place here on this planet. It's the reason why you see a lot of what we call eco-dharma, teachings within Buddhism about the ecology, about taking care of the resources that truly become us, truly become what we think of as us in this body. That's why we should care, for one reason. And also for the other beings who are being impacted, for the other beings that are receiving the effects of our presence. So Venerable Sariputta goes on and he says, for all its great age, the earth element will be revealed as impermanent, liable to end, to vanish. And I laughed when I read this sentence again today, because I was thinking, I saw in the news actually that one of the volcanoes exploded today. One of the volcanoes began to erupt in Iceland today. That's the earth element, right? Making its transformation, shifting from being liquid to being solid. And eventually that lava gets worn away over the centuries, over the millennia. That constant process on such a huge scale that it's hard for us to really even discern it. We send out these satellites, these big telescopes to try to look around and get a sense of it. And yet, right here, at this very personal scale, it is clear. It is clear what's happening at a very personal scale. So I want to give you another example of that, because one of the things that can be difficult for us as human beings. So there's this beauty of the way in which we are deeply informed by, embedded in, integral to, interconnected with all of the elements that we consider to be so-called external. So there's that beautiful vastness of this being that is implied there. And again, there is the very, very specific personal. And that can be quite difficult for us. It can feel like quite a vulnerability, the fact of the changes of the body, the fact that it is shifting, just like the volcanoes. Mm-hmm. So another story from my past is about when I was, the very first time that I was a chaplain, I was actually a volunteer. I was a volunteer at a hospital in South San Francisco, a small suburb just outside of the city there. And I was volunteering as a chaplain in a very small hospital there, where they had the woman who was the head of the spiritual care program was willing to train people from scratch. And so I was quite interested in this. I had just recently come back from my training in Japan, 2 years of training in Japan, and I wanted to learn how to apply this Bodhisattva way, how to apply this way of care for all beings. So I thought, well, maybe the chaplain way of doing this would be one way. So I went and I got trained there. And then there was a day when, you know, what you do when you're a chaplain in the hospital is that with some training and some care, some deep attention, mindful attention, you walk into people's rooms and just have an encounter, see what's up, see whether you can help in any way or just be a support or a presence in some way. And so it was my day on the floor there as a volunteer chaplain, and I walked over to a room where the door was open, and knocked on the door and took a step or two in, and there's a woman, the patient, in the hospital gown, sitting there on the bed, and she was facing another woman, younger woman, who most likely seemed like could be her daughter, and they were having a conversation. And I walked in and I said, "Oh, hello." You know, I introduced myself, and I'm the chaplain, the volunteer chaplain on the floor today, and I just came to see how things are going for you during your stay here. And the younger woman, who again wasn't the patient, said to me, "Oh, no, we're just about to leave. She's just about to get her clothes on and leave. She's literally being discharged right now. And so we don't really want to talk to you." And the woman who was the patient, who was sitting on the bed, turned and looked at me, and she turned and looked again back at her daughter, and she said, "Could you excuse us for a moment?" And she asked her daughter to leave the room. So her daughter was a little surprised at that, or at least it looked like that on her face, but she acknowledged, okay, she said, "All right." And she got up and she left. And she left me there with this woman who was the patient. And before I could even say anything at all, she started crying. And she was crying and crying, and she wasn't saying anything, and I wasn't saying anything. And she was just sitting there on the bed. And so I came over and I kind of rubbed her back a little bit, and she just kept crying. And I thought, well, I don't know what else to do. Can't think of anything that would be proper to say at this point. And so I'm going to wait and just be here with her until she's ready to talk, if she gets ready to talk. And after some time, after some time, she stopped crying. And she looked at me and she said, you know, that's the first time that I've had an opportunity to grieve for my breast. I came here to the hospital to have an operation and I lost my breast. And it's time for me to go home. But I hadn't had a chance to express my grief about that until just now. So thank you for giving me that opportunity, because now I feel better. Now I feel like I had my chance to do that. And she was just such a hero for me at that moment. And she still is. That's why I tell the story. She was the hero because she had a tremendous courage to step closer to her loss, step closer to the grief that was associated with what was happening with her body, with the right supports. So she knew that she would have the support of my presence without, she didn't need me to say anything, obviously, and she didn't need her daughter to say anything, but she did need that moment of privacy, and she did need whatever presence, whatever my presence was for her. And she made the most of that opportunity and really attended to that learning that the body was giving her. And because she had the courage to do that, because she actually met that grief, then she felt better. Then she was able to receive that learning. So it was because of her honesty, her own honesty with the fact of her body showing her that this great transformation is happening. It was because of her honesty and her courage that she was able to learn that lesson. So this fact of being embodied beings is something that is really important for us as practitioners, because it is both. It is both the opportunity to know ourselves as something incredibly vast and profoundly connected, profoundly integral to everything that surrounds us. It's an opportunity to know that in some way we can never be alone. And yet there is also this deep teaching of the vulnerability of the body. And when we face that, we actually perhaps can, with our courage and our honesty, experience that suffering and let it go. Thank you.